The year is 1943. Above the skies of Nazi-occupied Europe, a metallic giant tears through the clouds. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, weighing nearly 8 tons fully loaded, is the heaviest single-engine fighter of World War II. American pilots called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. To the Luftwaffe, it was the Beast. But despite its legendary toughness and firepower, 3 out of every 4 men who flew this machine into combat over Europe never came home. This is their story. Lieutenant James Mitchell stood on the tarmac at RAF Bodney in England, staring at his assigned aircraft. The P-47 Thunderbolt towered before him, its massive radial engine and bubble canopy gleaming in the weak March sunlight of 1944. At 22 years old, Mitchell had just arrived with the 302nd Fighter Group, fresh from training in the American Southwest where the skies were clear and the enemy was imaginary. Nothing had prepared him for this. The briefing officer's words still echoed in his mind. Your life expectancy is 11 missions, 11 sorties before the statistics caught up with you. Before the flak found you or a Messerschmitt got on your tail, or your engine failed over the channel, or any of 1,000 other ways this war could kill you at 20,000 feet. Mitchell walked around the Thunderbolt, running his hand along the riveted aluminum skin. The aircraft was a brute, powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine that produced over 2,000 horsepower. It could dive faster than almost anything in the sky, and could take punishment that would shred lighter fighters. But it was also heavy, sluggish in turns, and burned fuel at an alarming rate. Captain Robert Donnelly, a veteran with 30 missions under his belt, approached Mitchell with a cigarette dangling from his lips. Donnelly was an old man by fighter pilot standards at 26. His eyes had the hollow look of someone who had seen too many friends disappear into the clouds and never return. First mission tomorrow, kid. Escort run to Brunswick. We'll be covering the B-17s deep into Germany. Mitchell nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. He had heard the stories. The 8th Air Force was losing bombers at an unsustainable rate, sometimes 20 or 30 heavy bombers shot down in a single mission. Each bomber carried 10 men. The sky over Germany had become a graveyard. Let me tell you something they don't teach you in flight school, Donnelly continued, flicking ash onto the concrete. The P-47 is the toughest fighter we've got. I've seen these birds come back with cylinders shot out, control surfaces shredded, holes you could stick your head through. But tough doesn't mean invincible. He pointed at the massive engine cowling. That radial engine up front, it's air-cooled. One lucky shot in the oil cooler and you've got maybe 5 minutes before she seizes. Over Germany, that's not enough time to make it home. You'll be jumping out over enemy territory if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, you'll ride it down. Mitchell swallowed hard. What about the Germans? Donnelly's expression darkened. The Luftwaffe pilots we're facing aren't the green kids we fought over North Africa. These are veterans. Many of them have been flying since 1939. They know every trick, every weakness of our aircraft, and they're defending their homeland now. They fight like devils. He gestured toward the other P-47s lined up on the airfield. See those birds? Last month we had 18 pilots in our squadron.
Now we have 12.
3 were shot down over Schweinfurt. 2 collided in the clouds during a mission. 1 crashed on takeoff when his engine failed. The replacements arrive every week, fresh-faced kids like you, and within a month most of them are gone too. The statistics were devastating. In 1943 and early 1944, the 8th Air Force was losing aircraft and men at a rate that would have ended any other military operation in history. For every bomber that went down, the fighter escorts paid a heavy price trying to protect them. The P-47 squadrons were being bled white. What made it worse was the mission profile. Early P-47s had limited range. Even with external drop tanks, they could only escort the bombers to the German border before having to turn back, leaving the B-17s and B-24s to face the Luftwaffe alone for the most dangerous part of their mission. Fighter pilots called it the handoff of death. They would shepherd the bombers as far as they could, then watch helplessly as German fighters swarmed in for the kill on the return leg. Mitchell looked up at his aircraft again. Someone had painted a name on the nose, Devil's Darling. He wondered who had flown it before him and what had happened to that pilot. The ground crew chief, a grizzled sergeant named O'Brien, noticed his expression. She's a good bird, sir. Brought her last pilot back 23 times. He finished his tour and went home last week. You'll do fine, 23 missions. twice the life expectancy. Mitchell tried to take comfort in that, but the numbers were still grim. Even if he survived long enough to complete the required 35 missions for a combat tour, the odds were stacked against him. Tomorrow, he would join the meat grinder. Tomorrow, he would discover why being a P-47 pilot over Europe was one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire war. The alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence at 04:30 hours. Mitchell jolted awake in his bunk, heart already racing. Around him, other pilots stirred, their movements mechanical, rehearsed. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said 100 times before. The briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Major Kenneth Harrison stood before a large map of Europe, a pointer in his hand. Red lines traced their route from England, across the Channel, over occupied Holland and into the heart of Germany. Gentlemen, today we're hitting the ball-bearing factories at Brunswick. 200 B-17s will be going in. Our group will provide withdrawal support, picking up the bombers as they exit the target area. Intelligence reports heavy Luftwaffe activity in the region. Expect company. Mitchell felt his stomach tighten. Withdrawal support meant they would be meeting bombers that had already been through hell, damaged and vulnerable, with German fighters pursuing them like wolves after wounded prey. The weather officer gave his report. Solid cloud cover over the North Sea, clearing over the continent, visibility good at altitude. The operations officer listed call signs, frequencies, emergency procedures. Mitchell tried to absorb it all, but his mind kept drifting to what was coming. At 06:30, they walked to their aircraft. The ground crews had been working through the night. Engines were warmed, guns loaded, oxygen systems checked. Mitchell climbed into Devil's Darling, the cockpit still cold in the morning air. The instrument panel glowed softly as he ran through his checklist. Starting the R-2800 engine was always dramatic. The massive propeller turned slowly at first, then suddenly the engine caught with a thunderous roar, 18 cylinders firing, 2,000 horses straining against the brakes. The whole aircraft shook with barely contained power. They taxied out in formation, 16 P-47s in 4 flights of 4. Mitchell was flying as wingman to Captain Donnelly. His job was simple in theory, impossible in practice. Stay with your leader. Watch his tail. Don't get separated. The takeoff was smooth despite the heavy fuel load. Mitchell tucked in tight as they climbed through the overcast, breaking into brilliant sunshine at 12,000 feet. Below them, England disappeared beneath an endless sea of white clouds. Above, the sky was a deep crystalline blue that seemed to stretch into infinity. They climbed to 25,000 feet, forming up with other fighter groups. In the distance, Mitchell could see the bomber stream, hundreds of B-17s in tight combat boxes, their contrails drawing white lines across the sky. It was a magnificent and terrible sight. Donnelly's voice crackled over the radio. Stay sharp, Mitchell. Check your 6 constantly. The sun's behind us now, but that's where they'll come from. As they crossed the Dutch coast, heading deeper into enemy territory, Mitchell realized his hands were trembling on the control stick. Not from fear exactly, but from the overwhelming reality of what he was about to face. Below him, occupied Europe stretched to the horizon. Somewhere down there, German radar operators were tracking them. Somewhere ahead, Luftwaffe fighters were scrambling to intercept. The education was about to begin. They had been over Germany for 18 minutes when the radio exploded with urgent calls. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Multiple contacts. Mitchell's eyes snapped to the left and above. At first he saw nothing but empty sky. Then the sunlight caught them. A swarm of dark specks diving out of the glare. Focke-Wulf 190s, at least 20 of them, plummeting toward the bomber formation like hawks on pigeons. Break left. Donnelly's command cut through the radio chatter. Mitchell hauled the stick over, feeling the G-forces slam him into his seat. The P-47 responded sluggishly at first, its massive weight fighting the turn. This was the Thunderbolt's greatest weakness. German fighters could outturn it, outclimb it at low altitude, and dance around it in a dogfight. But what the P-47 could do was dive and absorb punishment. A Focke-Wulf flashed past Mitchell's canopy, so close he could see the black crosses on its wings. Instinct took over. He rolled inverted and pulled, trying to get his nose around for a shot. The FW-190 was already gone, scissoring through the formation toward a crippled B-17 trailing smoke. Someone was screaming on the radio. "Blue 3 is hit! Going down!" Mitchell craned his neck, searching for the stricken aircraft. He caught a glimpse of a P-47 spinning earthward, one wing sheared off, trailing flame. No parachute. The spinning aircraft disappeared into the clouds below, taking its pilot with it. His first mission. And already, he had watched a man die. Snap out of it. Donnelly's voice cut through his shock. On me, Mitchell! He forced himself to focus, rejoining formation with his flight leader. Around them, the sky had transformed into chaos. Fighters wheeled and dove, tracer rounds stitching through the air like deadly fireflies. A B-17 exploded ahead of them, simply disintegrating in a massive fireball. Mitchell flew through the debris field, pieces of aluminum and God knows what else hammering against his aircraft. The engagement lasted 11 minutes, though it felt like hours. The German fighters made repeated passes at the bombers, pressing their attacks with suicidal determination. Mitchell fired his guns twice, brief bursts at fleeting targets. He had no idea if he hit anything. Everything was happening too fast, his training evaporating in the face of real combat. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the German fighters broke off. Fuel or ammunition exhausted, they dove away toward their bases. The American formation continued westward, nursing their damaged bombers toward home. Mitchell's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the stick. His flight suit was soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature at altitude. He looked around at the surviving aircraft. They had started with 16 P-47s, he counted 13. 3 pilots gone, 3 empty bunks tonight. 3 letters to be written to families back home, and this was just his first mission. He had 34 more to survive. The debriefing lasted 2 hours. Intelligence officers questioned every pilot, trying to piece together what had happened in those chaotic minutes over Germany. Mitchell sat at a wooden table, still wearing his flight suit, drinking coffee that had gone cold. His voice sounded distant, mechanical as he described what he had seen. 3 FW-190s diving from 11 o'clock. Observed 1 P-47 go down. Pilot identification unknown. Fired approximately 200 rounds, no confirmed kills. Around him, other pilots gave similar accounts. The language of aerial combat was clinical, stripped of emotion. Aircraft became bogies or bandits. Men dying became pilots lost or failed to return. It was easier that way. Easier than acknowledging that the empty chairs in the briefing room had been filled by living, breathing human beings just hours before. Lieutenant David Kowalski had been one of them. 20 years old, from Pittsburgh, with a photograph of his girlfriend taped inside his cockpit. He had been flying Blue 3 when a 20mm cannon shell from a FW-190 tore through his engine. His P-47 had entered a flat spin, unrecoverable. No one saw him bail out. Captain William Chen. 31 missions completed, 4 more to finish his tour. A mechanical failure on his drop tank release caused a fire. He stayed with his burning aircraft long enough to clear the bomber formation before jumping. His parachute opened over occupied Holland. The resistance might get to him before the Germans. Might. Second Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, on his 4th mission. Shot down in the initial bounce. His aircraft simply exploded when cannon fire hit his fuel tanks. One moment he was there, the next just falling debris. That evening the squadron gathered at the Officers' Club, a converted farmhouse near the airfield. It was tradition. When men were lost, the survivors drank to their memory. Mitchell sat with Donnelly and the other veterans, nursing a whiskey he didn't want. "Gets easier," Donnelly said quietly, staring into his glass. "That's the worst part. It gets easier." Mitchell didn't believe him. How could watching friends die ever become easy? But over the following weeks he began to understand. Mission followed mission, each one a fresh descent into hell. Bremen, Hamburg, Berlin, Schweinfurt again. The names became a litany of blood. New pilots arrived weekly, eager and terrified. Within days, some of them were gone. Mitchell stopped learning their names. It hurt less that way. He learned the skills that kept pilots alive. Never fly straight and level for more than 10 seconds. Always check your 6. If someone calls out bandits, don't look. React immediately. Trust your wingman. Maintain radio discipline. Conserve ammunition. Know when to break off an attack. But mostly he learned that survival was about luck as much as skill. The flak burst that missed you by 10 feet instead of hitting you dead center. The German pilot whose guns jammed at the critical moment. The cloud bank that appeared just when you needed to escape. Luck, random and arbitrary, separated the living from the dead. By his 15th mission, Mitchell had become what Donnelly had been when they first met, a veteran with hollow eyes. Winter turned to spring in 1944 and something began to change. The P-47s received modifications that extended their range. New drop tank configurations allowed them to escort bombers deeper into Germany, staying with them all the way to the target and back. The handoff of death was ending. More importantly, the P-51 Mustang had arrived in significant numbers. With its superior range and maneuverability, the Mustang could reach Berlin and beyond. The P-47 groups were reassigned to a new role: fighter-bomber operations, ground attack missions, tank busting, strafing enemy airfields. It was, in many ways, even more dangerous than high-altitude escort work. Mitchell stood in the briefing room on a gray April morning, studying the target photographs. Railway marshalling yards near Kassel. Their mission was to destroy locomotives, rolling stock, and infrastructure. They would be going in low, under 500 feet, where every German soldier with a rifle could shoot at them. Major Harrison pointed to the intelligence photos. Flak concentrations here, here, and here. Light and medium anti-aircraft guns. Expect heavy ground fire throughout the target area. In and out fast, gentlemen. Don't make a second pass. Low-level attack missions had their own particular horrors. At high altitude, you could see threats coming. You had time to react, space to maneuver. Down on the deck, everything happened in split seconds. A church steeple appearing in your flight path. Power lines strung across a valley. A hidden flak gun that opened fire at point-blank range. The Thunderbolt's ruggedness became its greatest asset. The massive radial engine could absorb damage that would down other fighters. Pilots learned to use the P-47's weight and power in the ground attack role, diving at targets at tremendous speed, firing their .850 caliber machine guns in devastating bursts, then using the aircraft's excellent dive speed to escape. Mitchell had become proficient at it. His 23rd mission was a bridge near Cologne. His 25th was an ammunition dump that exploded so violently the shockwave flipped his aircraft inverted. His 28th was an airfield where he destroyed 3 German fighters. On the ground but took hits from a quad-mounted 20mm gun that punched holes through his wing. Each time Devil's Darling brought him home. The losses continued, but the nature of them changed. Fewer aircraft were being shot down in air-to-air combat. The Luftwaffe was being ground down, running out of fuel, pilots, and replacement aircraft. But ground fire claimed pilots with ruthless efficiency. A single bullet in the right place could bring down even a P-47. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, one of the few women pilots ferrying aircraft to Europe, had once told Mitchell that every pilot had a limited amount of luck, like coins in a pocket. Each mission you spent a coin. Eventually, your pocket was empty. Mitchell wondered how many coins he had left. By June 1944, he had flown 31 missions. The invasion of Europe was coming. Everyone knew it. The tempo of operations increased. More missions, bigger raids, constant pressure on the German war machine. 4 more missions to complete his tour. 4 more times to tempt fate. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Mitchell flew 3 missions that day, providing air cover over the Normandy beaches. The sky was thick with Allied aircraft, thousands of them, an aerial armada the world had never seen. Below, the greatest amphibious invasion in history unfolded. For once, the P-47 pilots weren't outnumbered. For once, they owned the sky. His 35th and final mission came 2 weeks later. A routine ground attack mission against German positions near Caen. Routine. The word itself was a joke. Nothing about combat flying was ever routine. They took fire over the target. Mitchell felt the impacts, heard the metal-on-metal sound of bullets striking his aircraft. Devil's Darling shuddered but kept flying. He pulled up, cleared the target area, and headed for home. Halfway across the channel, his oil pressure began to drop. That faithful R-2800 engine, which had carried him through 35 missions, was finally dying. He coaxed it along, talking to the aircraft like it could hear him. Just a little further. Just get me home. He made it to the English coast before the engine seized completely. The propeller stopped, suddenly fixed in place, and the Thunderbolt became a 7-ton glider. Mitchell found a field, wheels down, and brought her in. The landing was rough but survivable. He climbed out and stood beside the aircraft that had saved his life so many times. Devil's Darling would never fly again. Neither would he, at least not in combat. His tour was complete. The war continued without him. Mitchell returned to the United States in July 1944, was promoted to captain, and spent the remainder of the war training new pilots. He taught them everything he had learned. The technical skills, the tactics, the survival techniques, but he couldn't teach them the most important lesson, that luck, not skill, would ultimately determine who lived and who died. The statistics were devastating and undeniable. Of the pilots who flew P-47 Thunderbolts over Europe in 1943 and 1944, approximately 75% were killed, captured, or seriously wounded. Some never completed a single mission. Others, like Mitchell, survived their full tour through a combination of skill, caution, and sheer random chance. The P-47 itself went on to compile an impressive combat record. It destroyed more ground targets than any other Allied fighter. In air-to-air combat, it achieved a favorable kill ratio against German fighters. It was rugged, reliable, and when properly flown, deadly effective. But none of that changed the fundamental truth. Flying fighters over Nazi-occupied Europe was one of the most dangerous assignments in military history. The young men who climbed into those cockpits knew the odds. They flew anyway, day after day, until their luck ran out or their tour was complete. Mitchell survived. Kowalski, Chen, and Hayes did not. Neither did thousands of others whose names are inscribed on memorial walls and military headstones across America and Europe. They were the men who flew the Thunderbolt into hell and, more often than not, never came back.